You don't know, do you?
I was just trying to focus on the clock. This is Breakfast with Steve and Ellie. Good morning to you.
OK, let's start by having a look at today's front pages for you. In the Daily Express this morning, Rishi Sunak has vowed to kick foreign lawbreakers out of the country if he becomes Prime Minister.
The Mail is focusing on the closure of the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic after a review found that it failed vulnerable children.
The Mirror decrees the profits of misery as Britain's energy firms make massive profits on the back of the energy crisis. British gas owner Centrica and Shell have made almost £11 billion in just 6 months.
The Guardian has that as well, saying the profit surge insults working people as millions struggle to pay their bills.
The Eye says the Conservative leadership contest has led to a cabinet leak inquiry. Ministers worry that they can no longer hold frank discussions in case talks are weaponised in the battle to succeed Boris.
Well, let's talk through some of those papers with the author and academic Joanna Williams and Benjamin Butterworth from The Eye. Good to see you both this morning.
Good
morning. Joanna, let's start with something a little bit lighter. In The Guardian this morning, the Commonwealth Games.
No, it looks like a really good event with the opening ceremony yesterday. I've got a soft spot for Birmingham. I lived there for 8 years, so it's really nice to see Birmingham getting its moment in the spotlight. And it seems like it was a real celebration of all things Birmingham, with cars and bulls and even Malala doing a speech. It's a really positive event for her to be doing, to be speaking at, and an event to have taken place. Obviously there's been a lot in the news over the past week reminiscing about the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Obviously it's the 10th anniversary of that, which shows we can still do it, and this is becoming one thing that we're very, very good at in this country now, which is really nice, and hopefully bodes very well for Eurovision next year as well.
Oh yes, we've got that to look forward to, haven't we?
We're going to be busy, aren't we?
Well, I think it's nice. I mean, I think these things do. It's easy to be cynical about them, Stephen. But
What?
I think it's nice, it does bring the country together when you have things like this. And it is nice to have a bit of a celebration.
It's probably something we need at the moment, isn't it, Joanna? Did you catch the opening ceremony last night? What did you think?
I've got to say I didn't.
Were you in bed ready for this?
I was in bed ready for this. That's my...
What time was it?
Unlike me.
You were at the party last night.
I was out last night. I know.
I was out.
And it must have still been on at about 9, half 9.
Oh no, well.
No, you were all asleep.
I'd watched my episode of Stranger Things and got to bed by that point.
I think it was on until nearly 10:30. It was quite long.
Did you catch it, Benjamin?
I watched bits of it, but I don't really understand the Commonwealth Games, to be honest. It seems like it must cost an absolute fortune.
Well,
it's the second time we've hosted it in 8 years, because it was in Glasgow in 2017. And I'm just not sure anyone really pays any attention to it. I can tell you anything about the Commonwealth Games other than when I was growing up. I grew up in Manchester. I remember we hosted it in what must have been the early noughties. But I kind of think it's a bit of a waste of money, to be honest.
What is really interesting, I think, Joanna, what you were saying there about the Olympic Games, obviously 10 years ago, there's such a focus, isn't there, on the legacy and what's going to be left in the city after the Games leave. And there was criticism that not enough was done in Stratford, in London. Do you think that we'll see more of a legacy, more infrastructure in Birmingham?
I mean, to be honest, this is my issue with the Commonwealth Games, that I don't think it gets anything like the attention to justify the enormous cost. And we host it so regularly that it doesn't feel quite so special as the Olympics. Now, actually, the London 2012 Olympics is the only modern Olympics that it's thought made a profit for the host country. And if you go to East London, I mean, that part of the world is hugely regenerated.
Oh, yeah.
Stratford is unrecognisable. So I think actually we did a pretty decent job of making the Olympics last. And some football team that I can't remember which one is in there now, aren't they? But I think we did a great job of the Olympics.
West Ham?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm a Middlesbrough.
Oh, right. No, I know what you mean, though. I don't know how much it costs. I don't know where the money comes from.
Well,
if it comes from all the Commonwealth countries, I don't know.
I'm reading this in The Guardian, right? So
Yeah.
the stadium underwent a £72 million renovation before these games, and Birmingham was awarded it as a replacement for Durban in South Africa because they ran into financial difficulties.
Well, of course
We weren't even meant to. Yeah, we're not even supposed to be.
I think
right.
it's kind of I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit naive here, but I think talking about the money, it really detracts a little bit from, it should be just an inspiring event.
In a cost of living crisis, though, do you not think?
If there are children there who are watching those athletes thinking, do you know what, I want to have a try at doing that, and that's something I'd be interested in doing. The money, yes, the figures sound large, but when you think about the billions that we've spent as a nation over the past few years on tackling COVID, it's a drop in the ocean. I mean, this is such a tiny amount, really, in comparison to everything else. I think it's worth it.
Well, anyway, let's move on to something else. Fed up at talking
Steve has had enough.
games already. I have.
You're not
Because
interested.
Benjamin.
Yes.
Right. Now this, I'm all for the market economy, right? If we want a successful market economy, companies need to be able to make a profit. Totally get that. But when the Mirror is reporting, as lots of papers are this morning, about Shell and Centrica making huge amounts of profit over the last 6 months. I mean, many times what they were reporting in the same period 12 months ago.
Yeah, so,
Surely this can't be right.
well, Shell made a profit, not a turnover, a profit of £9.4 billion in 3 months. And Centrica, the other major provider, the one behind British Gas, made 1.3 billion. Now that 1.3 billion that Centrica made is 5 times what they'd made in the previous period. So that's an enormous rise in profits. And actually, I feel quite naive about this because I thought that the rise in costs was purely due to supply problems and the structure of getting.
Yeah, so you would have thought the profits wouldn't increase.
Exactly. I thought it was just sort of this inescapable nightmare that we were stuck in for a bit. But clearly there's something gone awry here. Now, you know, profits like that, the head of the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, called it an insult to workers, which I have to say I think it is, because, you know, I don't think you should have sort of, you know, random windfall taxes or, you know, tax companies until they can't function, right? I don't think that's the way that a democratic modern country should work. And yet, what is the point in them being able to take £11 billion out while pensioners literally can't put the heating on, while people that are trying to feed their kids are choosing between heating and feeding their kids, and they can't get in the car and go anywhere? Like, people can't function, they can't spend any money on things they want because of this. And so when the boss of one of these firms is getting a £6 million bonus because of the rise in profits, I think that's the point where politicians probably should step in and moderate it.
Well, because they're looking at the figures that we're quoting yesterday, say by January, we might be looking at the average household paying £500 a month, £6,000 a year for energy prices, which obviously for the vast majority of people is just not doable.
It's not doable, it's terrifying, quite frankly. I mean, I'm sitting there worrying already, right at the end of July, about paying my heating costs in the winter. It's really, really terrifying. The thing with the profits here is normally you associate increased profits with a really good service. You know, that must be a company that's doing really well. Whereas you just know already, and I can feel myself getting angry even thinking about this, that what we'll get this winter is patronising letters through the post. Can you remember there was one company sent people a pair of socks through the post last winter? We'll get patronising advice about carrying a hot water bottle or wearing a vest. You know, if they're making this money, I wouldn't have so much of a problem with it if it was actually being invested back into creating cheap, abundant energy for the future, but that doesn't seem to be what's happening.
Well, we need to hear from them, don't we, to hear what they say about this, but surely, with that sort of money, I can't see why they can't give everyone a month's worth of free electricity or free gas or whatever it might be, or, you know,
yeah, I mean,
take 30% off the bills.
In France, the Macron government nationalised the main provider, and so their energy has only gone up by 4%, while ours in the last energy cap went up by 50%. So clearly, you know, another government of a very similar country managed to stop people struggling so much. And I think that, you know, something like that probably makes sense at the moment. Now, Liz Truss at last night's Tory leadership hustings, she said she is completely against a windfall tax. And so if she's PM in 6 weeks or whatever it is, it looks like there'll be nothing like that happening. So, but, you know, I think the government's going to be in a difficult position because the strength of feeling on this is going to be very strong.
And I think you're right, Joanna, where this isn't something that's just going to affect the minority of people. It's actually going to affect the majority. I mean, people who have never struggled to pay their bills before could struggle for the first time. It really is shocking. Joanna, I just want to touch on one more story that we've only got time for, one more paper. Tory leadership in the eye. Let's have a look at that.
Yeah, so this is a story about the Cabinet Office investigating multiple leaks from Whitehall, basically stories revealing details, personal details perhaps about both of the candidates potentially being leaked to the press. I mean, obviously the obvious point to make here is this shows how nasty the leadership race between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss is potentially going to become as they've become more desperate perhaps to take that leadership position. But I actually think it raises a much, much bigger issue about a culture of leaking in Whitehall, where our politics seems to have really been driven over the past at least 2 or 3 years now on this kind of, you've got what's going on the surface, and then beneath that you've got this constant stream of leaks to perhaps an all too willing press who are very eager for the stories.
But it's always been the worst.
Well, it has,
come
but
on. I mean, the leaks in the 80s and 90s
I agree, but I do really think it's stepped up a notch as well. I mean, the time Boris Johnson was in office, I think it has massively stepped up. I mean, you can perhaps, I think there's a sense of a kind of Remainer establishment who really had it in for Boris Johnson, you know, and Dominic Cummings was one of the main people behind this, wasn't he? Constantly leaking stories to the press. But I think you can't run a country like that. You know, if you're not trusting the civil service, the other people who are sitting in the room alongside you, you cannot run a country. You have to be able to think out loud. You have to be able to experiment with different ideas and just have honest discussions with people. And if you think your colleagues or other people sitting in that room are going to be leaking stories to the press, you can't function as a government. So I think something's got to happen to crack down on this culture.
Well, there you go. You could well be right. Joanna, Benjamin, we've got to leave it there. Thank you both
Thanks
very much
much
indeed.
Thank you.